Greetings to you all. This is Tendai Dumbuchena, host of the podcast Africa in Crisis. Welcome to episode 15. Last week, the world was shocked by three terrible tragedies in South Korea, India, and Somalia. In Seoul, the capital of South Korea, 156 young people were crushed to death celebrating Halloween. In India's state of Gujarat, a collapsed suspension bridge claimed the lives of 147 people. Bombs in two cars exploded in Mogadishu, Somalia's capital city, killing 100 people in yet another terrorist attack claimed by the Al-Qaeda affiliate Al-Shabaab. Of the three tragedies, the one in Mogadishu induced the least sense of shock because for 3 decades, Somalia has been a theater of war and terrorism. Africa and the rest of the world have become inured to the violence that has defined this country of 17 million people. It should be a cautionary tale for the African Union and its 55 member states. The lesson to be learned is that the AU and its regional bodies must be proactive on issues of governance and human rights to prevent recurrences of what happened in Somalia. In 1969, a military coup brought Major General Mohamed Siad Barre into power in Somalia. He ruled as a dictator for 22 years until he was overthrown in 1991. One-party and military dictatorships were the norm in Africa during that era. Barre was not an aberration. What was unusual about Somalia was that Barre's ouster left a power vacuum in the country for almost 2 decades. Usually in all other parts of Africa, dictators were replaced by those who deposed them without the collapse of central governments. There is one thing worse than a dictatorship: a power vacuum. In the absence of central authority, Somalia rapidly descended into a failed state. There was anarchy and violence as various armed groups sought to seize power, with none of them able to. Somalia is a Muslim country and member of the African Union and Arab League. Events in Afghanistan and parts of the Middle East led to the formation of Al-Qaeda by Saudi Arabian national Osama bin Laden. In August 1998, Al-Qaeda planted bombs at American embassies in Nairobi, Kenya and Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, killing 224 people. It was inevitable that Somalia, a failed Muslim country with no central authority, would be an enticing prospect for jihadists to set up an Islamic State. It is very likely that America's interest in pursuing Al-Qaeda, who had established a presence in Somalia and Sudan, did influence a decision by the African Union's Peace and Security Council in 2007 to establish the African Union mission in Somalia, AMISOM. The AU resolution was approved by the United Nations Security Council, paving the way for an African multinational peacekeeping force in Somalia. Previous efforts to reconcile and pacify multiple armed groups were largely unsuccessful. Opposition to the AU efforts also came from the Union of Islamic Courts, which eventually morphed into a military and political force. The AU, with the support of the UN, European Union, and the United States, must be commended for the initiative to have a robust military and diplomatic response to the anarchy and violence that prevailed in Somalia. But prevention is better than cure. That is the lesson to be learned as the African continent still battles with issues of governance and human rights. The federal government of Somalia was established in 2012 and is fully recognized by the international community. The AU and its international partners felt enough progress had been made in Somalia to replace AMISOM with the African Union Transition Mission in Somalia, ATMIS, in April 2022. ATMIS will be responsible for overseeing a process that will culminate in the Somali armed forces taking full responsibility for the security of their country. Somalia is not out of the woods yet. Al-Shabaab, as demonstrated last week, still poses a deadly threat to the fledgling Federal Republic of Somalia government led by President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud. The country is in the grip of the worst drought in 40 years, which has destroyed livestock and crops. About 7.7 million Somalis are in desperate need of food, healthcare, housing, and education. Rebuilding an economy destroyed by decades of war and anarchy and the collapse of institutions is a daunting task. This podcast last week reported concerns by Amnesty International Secretary General about the deteriorating governance and human rights situation in West Africa. Hopefully, African leaders heeded her concerns. The AU and all its regional bodies are officially committed to good governance and human rights. They must demand compliance. It should not be passive and wait until things get out of hand. It should not take the blood and treasure of other nations to sort out the mess left by African leaders who are not held to account by their peers. I thank you, listeners. Please post your comments below on the issues we have just raised. What more can be done to help Somalia, and what should we do to make African dictators and other authoritarian leaders be held to account now before they do more damage to our nations?